All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Weber. I'm talking tonight about scaling human insight with big data. And I work at a company called Zoomdata. I run the UX team over there. I also teach UX at NYU. I'm going into my 10th year there, so that's very exciting. The big thing I'm talking to you about today is about scaling insight. So at my company, we talk a lot about big data all the time. We talk about trillions or quadrillions of rows of data. How do you make that understandable by people? How do you trade knowledge about that? And part of the problem for us isn't just how do you move all those bits around, but how do you move insight and knowledge so that if somebody comes up with something really interesting about that data, somebody else can discover it too. So we talk about that a lot. And I'm going to actually talk about 4 golden principles for sharing insight. And I'll be talking about some old projects I've worked on, and I'll talk about things that you can abstract to your own applications as well. So the first thing I'm going to be doing sort of a deep dive into is this massively collaborative problem-solving application. So massively collaborative problem-solving, it's a big phrase, but it means that if you have a single problem, how can you get thousands of people to work together in real time on the same problem and then have like a nice, very easy to read strategic document after like 3 hours. And it's pretty interesting. I'll show it to you in a second. I used something called Amazon Turk for this particular project. If you're not familiar with Amazon Turk, it is essentially human workers who are hooked up to an API. You can ask them to do usually simple things like, hey, is there a cow in this photo? And they will say, yes, there is a cow. No, there is not a cow. And they will earn about 5 cents for that sort of task. And so I use that a lot because, well, through this, I generated about 16,000 tasks to create this one document in a couple of hours. So like I mentioned, this demo is actually a little bit old. This demo is from about 2009. Application still works, but this is a particularly interesting data set. Just to go back historically to 2009, what was going on in 2009, oil prices were spiking really, really high up. And there was a lot of people who were concerned about oil price and particularly about the cost of gas. And so that was something that was on the mind of everybody there. Now, before I started this particular project, I asked the people on Turk, like, hey, what kind of big problem facing the world would you like to work on? And they said, well, what they talked about was making the United States independent of foreign oil. So that was sort of the topic of the day. That's what they wanted to talk about. So I said, fine, let's come up with a plan of attack of how we're going to make the United States independent of foreign oil. So I will show you what that looks like. So it looks fairly simple at this point. It is 7 fairly easy to read steps, right? We can make sense of this. It's not too much detail. This actually, just getting to this 7 steps, took a lot of human processing power to get everyone to sort of hone in on this. And I'll show you how that works step for step in a couple of minutes. But we can actually dig very deep down into this stuff and get very pragmatic steps of how you get from one point to another. If we just say begin by using less oil, like who cares, right? I mean, unless we know more, what are we going to get out of that? So we can click into it and we can see, oh, there's another 7 steps below that. Can you continue cache for clunkers, expand public transit, and we can keep going even deeper. Let's go in here and look at this. I want to call out something that's actually really, really interesting about this. When we dig into it, we can see a great deal of forethought about this and intelligence of how all these things come together. Each person who was working on this was working individually on just a very small chunk of it, and it all comes together in a really cohesive way. And also, most of these people usually are saying, hey, is there a cow in this picture, yes or no? And we're getting a lot of very, very thoughtful, insightful opinions from it. And it always just sort of like blows me away. So I will actually say, hey, is there anything that anybody would like to take a look at in this list? We'll go a little bit deeper into it. Sorry, say it again?
Wind energy.
Wind energy, thank you very much. I knew there's someone here who cared about it. All right, so find a cheaper way to transport the power from windmills to cities, locate more windmills in our Western American sector, persuade more investors to invest in wind power. Great, reject coal power, why not? We can go deeper into wind power by explaining the uses of wind power without several hurdles, educate the investors that produces no greenhouse gas emissions. Wind energy, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we can keep going. It gets really deep. And again, this was created in about 3 hours. Let's take a look at how did that come up. The thing with this is that it was created with just 3 very simple types of tasks that were sent out to each individual worker. They were, the first one was create. We want you to create 7 steps, not 147 steps or 15,000 steps, but just 7 steps. And the first people who came to the application came with a rather big question. They said, hey, they were actually tasked with coming up with the seed for how this whole big problem would come together. They said, hey, in 7 steps or less, how would you deal with this problem? That was sent out to, I'll go into the numbers in a few minutes. The next kind of task was, will you rate the task? Rate how well somebody else's task came along. So you just come in, you get a random task in front of you, and you say, oh, is this good, is this bad? And you rate it. And a bunch of other people are going to rate it too. Finally, people are asked to atomize it. And that's basically saying, hey, we have this task. That's kind of one. These 7 steps have been selected as the best way to get something done. Do we need more details on these things? And this is a really crucial part, because if you look at that first step, remember those first 7 steps we were looking at, they were, anyone in particular by itself wasn't really very comprehensive, and we wanted to dig deeper in. This is the way, this is the mechanism to find out how are people going to go deeper and deeper in to figure out where we're going to get more details. So let's take a look at how this works in slow motion. We'll go through a couple of steps together. So imagine you come in, you're asked to fill in 7 steps. That same task is sent to 50 other people. So we're getting a variety of different ways to tackle the same problem. And then each of those 50 individual tasks are then sent out to other people when they come back to go vote. And then each of those original 50 tasks are voted on 20 times by other people. So we have 50 tasks, each of them voted 20 times. So we have a rating scale. And then finally, after things are rated, we find out, okay, which one do we need more details on? And that's sent to, actually it's 20 workers, that's a typo. But in total, we come up with this 7 steps, and it took 1,020 tasks to get to this point. But what's really interesting is to look at the data, the data on the ratings, and also on the details, and you see that it's pretty solid. It's not a bad task for having spent a couple of bucks in Amazon Turk. So we then go a little bit deeper, and this is really where the magic comes into play, right? So we've got 7 steps, who cares? We really need to get a lot more details as to how this thing works. And the thing is, now we're going into it recursively. Now we're going to go into each of those 7 steps, and we're going to say for each of those, how do you do this individual piece in 7 steps or less? And we're saying, hey, begin by using less oil. How do you do that in 7 steps? And they fill in the 7 steps, and then guess what happens? 20 other people doing that same task, then those get voted on, and we get the best selection for that thing. And we go through each one of those tasks, and we keep growing and growing what essentially becomes a tree of knowledge of how this thing can be represented. So we have our 20 workers, we vote on it, say where the details go, and our next step is defined. We say, where do we want to go deeper still? And then we make another branch on the tree. Again, only takes a few hours, and we've got a pretty remarkable set of data really, really fast. Okay, so we've got this neat thing, and let's take a look at how those steps work again together. We have those 7 steps where you ask someone to just create. Then when they get rated, then we decide if we need to loop on some of those things again, all right? So this is where the recursive notion is. And this is it. That's how the whole thing works. It's a pretty nice, simple setup. And that's great. I hope you enjoy that. And you might be thinking, however, but Matt, I don't work on massively collaborative problem-solving systems. And you're saying, where is the golden goose? You're saying, Matt, how can I possibly use this for my own project? Which is why you're also saying, I need principles, man. I need something I can apply on other projects, which is why we're going to next go into the next part, which is the 4 golden rules for sharing insight. So luckily, there's a nice segue into this. The first golden rule, and we'll take that last project as our model, and we'll look at a few other places, is to encapsulate our data. That means if we can kind of take our data and make it really sort of make it so it's hard to destruct, it can be moved into a lot of different places. It's easy for it to sort of be reused in a lot of different situations. The next one is that it's traceable. So if someone gives us a piece of insight, we want you to prove it, man. Show us the data that's behind it. Show us why you're saying what you are saying. Next one is leveraging recursion, which we just saw with the looping and the tree. And finally, that you're actually making it open so that you can get lots of insight on it too. So like I mentioned, there's thousands of people working on this. It's not easy to get a lot of people to work on your big projects. Okay, so one at a time. The first one was encapsulate. And we saw how each of these tasks was made to individual piece that was sent out for people to work on. I also, and just a few other things where I see this same kind of principle working out, we see information being encapsulated as, you go into Facebook or something like that, you will see your infographic being spread around for the day. You'll see it on LinkedIn. And a lot of it is just about the data format that it comes in. That is an indestructible little GIF that happens to fit in the width of whatever application you're looking at. We also see it in applications like dashboards for data visualization, where you'll actually you'll embed one thing into another, and it's easy to a chart itself becomes encapsulated. It's very easy to move from one place to another. Hey, that's from Zoomdata, that dashboard. It looks great. Then the next thing is that the data itself is traceable. You want to be able to find out where it's going. So one of the things that I've noticed when we've talked to a lot of people in the past is people want proof, right? You can't just say, hey, here's a fact that we've called out over data or however it works. We want to see, how did you get your findings? Where does this all come from? So as a bunch of UX people, I bet you've done some usability tests before, and you probably want to show your findings to folks. You want to show your raw data. And that makes sense for these things too. So if you have your application is able to show the train that goes up. So in this case, we had our big tree. And we show the context of how everything was presented. We've seen it before also, and this is sort of an anti-example of what we've done. I did a bit of research on pivot tables a couple of years ago. Pivot tables are just fancy spreadsheets that people would play with the data, right? You get analysts playing with the data in something like a spreadsheet. And then they'd be like, well, this is not easy to share. And they would copy and paste it into a PDF or an email or something. And then inevitably what happens is that people are like, hey, where's the data? We want to see the data. We don't believe whatever you came up with in terms of your analysis. And that process of it not bringing somebody back to the original data creates something very insular. And people really do want to see the proof. They want to see the raw data. We live in an era of big data. Present it, provide it with people, and give people the context to help them make good decisions. Like I mentioned, in this big application, we've got a ton of people coming in. They need to see the context of how everything is related to each other. Let's see, here's another one, another interesting one. If we take a look at this chart, for instance, it's a bar chart, and this has got something on the order of about 100,000 different emails that it is giving a summary of. Okay, that's great that you're giving us a breakdown of the chart of the emails, but show us the actual data. Let us play with the data ourselves, and you can go into a bar and look at the actual emails. Important factor for this. Next one, the third golden rule is about leveraging recursion. So we saw in our application, we saw how we took those 3 steps and we created a tree, mainly by recursion. We let people reuse and re-see how we kept going through the tree in a recursive way. But recursion also means that you're able to reuse data in a lot of different places. One of the most famous examples of this that was actually a major influence for this application is something called the Delphi method, which comes out of the RAND Corporation. This is a really old method. It comes out of a think tank for the US military. And it is a way of, well, let me explain it this way. Let's imagine we all worked in the military together. And we were given a bunch of 3 photos, aerial photos, and we were asked to find military combatants. and that we're all experts, and we're all given a grease pen, and we're asked to circle where we think combatants might be, maybe our reasoning on it. And even though we know a lot, we might not, we only have a limited sphere of knowledge. Maybe we're right 10% of the time. But if we took all of our photographs, and I gave it all to you, you all gave them to me, and I made a book out of it, redistributed it back to you, and you now had the ability to look at the wisdom of everybody else, your accuracy rate would really go up a lot higher. And let's say we give you another few photos. Same photos, you're asked to circle where you thought enemy combatants were. And you have the knowledge of everybody here you could leverage. After a couple of rounds of doing that, you keep sending your results back, I keep sending you back everybody's results, your accuracy would skyrocket up to something like 75%. It's a really phenomenal way of using recursion to spread knowledge throughout an organization or through structures. Similar kind of thing to what we're seeing in our application. In a very less structured way, we see the same thing going on with Twitter, which is it's such a weird place, but it's, for just watching knowledge move around, it's really phenomenal. But we see it happening in a very non-structured way with Twitter, with people retweeting other popular things, and we see things being reused. And let's see, fourth golden rule for scaling insight, and this is about being very, very open. So in terms of being open, I think I kind of alluded to this before. You need to be able to see everybody else's thoughts, everybody else's reactions. How does all of this come together in a nice, big, comprehensive form? And one of the places that's been actually really surprisingly forward about this has been the U.S. Army. And so there's a couple of things that happened in the last 10 years. You had General McChrystal, who was really pro sharing information and transparency, and making sure that information wasn't getting siloed up in a lot of different places. You also had Dr. Robert Nielsen with his knowledge management principles. And it is part of the doctrine, you need to open this stuff up. You need to move stuff around the silos. And you can imagine how much data there is going on in the U.S. Army, how much they learn about enemy combatants every day. It's really of the same principle of moving that data around and not keeping it in a single place, allowing everybody to view what's going on. All right, so the four golden rules again, they were to encapsulate the data. You need to make it traceable so people can go back to the top and see what the context was for things. You want to be able to leverage recursion. You get some really fantastic patterns that way, and you want to make it open so everyone can take advantage of it, and you'll actually hit your scale numbers. So that's it. Kind of burned through it a little quickly. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Great.
The people that you're asking these questions, what is their domain knowledge?
That's an excellent question. So usually they are people off the street. So in this case, they did not know a lot about global energy issues. Some of them had great opinions about it, but it was a sort of an average person. What was really interesting was if you ask them what are some of the problems you want them to work on. Now, one of the issues with this is that you really need to get people who are passionate about the project, because again, I'm paying them 5 cents per task. They can choose if they want to do it or not, and if it's not something really interesting, they won't do it, right? So a big thing comes on what's interesting to you, and what was really, I was doing another one of these a few weeks ago. What was very interesting was people were talking about income inequality is probably the biggest thing that came up. Another one that came up was about joblessness. A lot of things that might be issues for people who are getting paid 5 cents per task is interesting, but those did come up.
Those robot checks where you say, I'm not a robot, are they capturing data for useful purposes? Is this a hamburger? Who's behind that? Or do you ever think about using one of those systems?
So I would use those systems to do what part in this? Like
when you're signing up for something, you have to perform a check to prove you're human, not a robot. And some of those checks are capturing answers or data. Do you know anything about how that works?
A little bit, I think, but I've never actually worked on them. What I assume happens is that they want to assume people are human, right? Oh, and that I think they have like a photo and they're trying to capture the knowledge for another use. Now, I don't know too much about it. I haven't actually worked on those, but they seem interesting. Kind of similar, but they're not very structured, the results. I can't say I'm really interested by it, to be honest, because you'd be like, all right, we're helping to train optical character recognition. I know they do it, I just don't find it interesting personally, but that's me. Sorry, way back there. Hi there.
What was the total cost of the horizontal for the oil pack?
This is about $500 to do this particular project. It took about 3 hours. I had to like kick over the machine and pull out the plug, make sure I didn't lose any money, because you can imagine it grows exponentially how much money you're spending on it. So you can. I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but I didn't literally pull out the computer. But I did have like an emergency stop, a couple of emergency stops that I keep in there, because once you like light the fire, you run away and you just watch it go, and that's it.
So my understanding of the Turk is that the majority of the workers of the Turk are from very poor areas where 5 cents is probably really a lot. So not necessarily passionate about it. So I wonder if you have been thinking of other sources that could be better alternatives.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, just so you know a little bit more about the demographics for this one, they all were United States citizens for this one, living in the United States. They were in the United States. And in terms of other sources, yeah, there's a lot of other changes I'd like to do to it. I would love to embed it into the social network and get people that way. Wouldn't have to pay for it all. You don't get the same transactional capability that you get with Amazon Turk. I can send like a task. I can track all sorts of things about the status of that task once I send it over there. Is somebody working on it? Have they accepted it? Have they declined it? All those kinds of things, how to manage it. But I would love, this is like a side toy project for me, but I would really love to do things where it could tap into a social network because that's where much larger numbers are. There's only, my personal guess is there's 50,000 active people on Turk, but I don't have any. They claim much more, but I don't believe it. But that's just me. Any other questions? None over there and over there. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, and enjoy the show.